Hi, everybody. Simone here with Bulletproof Business Growth, as always, with some ideas and insights what to pay attention to when you are growing and scaling your business. And of course, that has to do with leadership and building the best teams on the planet so that you can have more freedom and you can actually focus on what counts, which is growing and scaling the business and being the strategic part of the business. So today I might get on a little bit of a rant, so stay with me here, but I want to dive deep into a leadership topic that's becoming increasingly critical in our changing generations and the workplace, the stark difference between fear-based leadership and leadership that truly inspires. And if you want to do well, especially with the newer generations, of course, you need to develop that leadership style in a way where everybody wants to really be with you. So I've spent the last 20 years working with thousands of business leaders across industries, and I'm really seeing a very fascinating pattern emerge here. So the leadership approaches that worked even a decade ago are truly falling flat today, especially, like I said, with the younger generations that are entering the workforce or that are actually making up quite a bit of the workforce now. So in this episode, I want to explore why fear-based leadership is failing, and particularly with Gen Z. And we'll examine what the real cost of intimidation is as a strategy. And most importantly, I'll share some concrete, actionable steps to actually transform your leadership approach to create teams that don't just comply, but they're genuinely inspired to go above and beyond for you and your vision because they truly want to be with you. So let's start with kind of a unhappy reality. Most workplaces today are still dominated by fear-based leadership. This isn't just my observation. This is a recent McKinsey report found that 56% of American workers consider their boss mildly or highly toxic, and a staggering 75% say that dealing with their manager is the most stressful part of their workday. So let that sink in for a second, because we're talking about huge numbers. More than half of all the Americans in the workforce think that their boss is mildly or very toxic, and more than 70% say that dealing with their manager is incredibly stressful for them. So that'll give us a little bit of a clue what's not working. So this is not a small problem. This is an epidemic that's eating away at organizational performance, innovation, and of course, sustainability. So, when I think about my clients, last quarter I worked with a manufacturing company where the CEO prided himself of running a tight ship. And in meetings, he would regularly call out mistakes in front of everyone. He monitored lunch breaks. He sent demanding emails at all hours, expecting immediate responses. So on paper, his company looked really successful. They were profitable, they were growing. But once we kind of started digging in, the problems were mounting. They had a turnover over 32% above industry average. Innovation had stalled completely, and he really couldn't attract new, younger talent. So the whole team he had was pretty stagnant. And how do I say this? They weren't really putting in for him. So when he was looking for fresher energy, Gen Z candidates would come for interviews, but they would rarely accept his offer. And those who did would typically leave within the first 6 months. So when we're thinking about this CEO, he really represents what organizational psychologist Adam Grant calls leadership by intimidation and insult. And that's a style, in the old days that may have been tolerated, but it's now proving catastrophically ineffective, especially with younger workers. So, when you think about what exactly is fear-based leadership, there's a human workplace CEO, Liz Ryan, has she came up with 5 characteristics for this: resistance to new ideas, control and over communication, micromanagement, avoidance of feedback, and then, of course, the creation of a blame culture. So what's particularly insidious with this is that many fear-based leaders don't even recognize that they're operating that way. They genuinely believe that they're maintaining necessarily high standards. They're running a tight ship, high standards, accountability, and some are simply repeating the leadership patterns that they experienced, of course, earlier in their careers. It's kind of like repeating the relationship that you've learned, even though it might not have been successful. But look, regardless of intention, the impact is the same: disengagement, suppressed innovation, and of course, underperformance, and a team that really doesn't care. So what happens when you continue with fear-based leadership in today's workplace? The consequences are far more severe than most leaders realize. So let's talk about the immediate performance impact. The research is really, really clear here. So Adam Grant, who I just mentioned earlier, points to studies showing that teams subjected to disrespectful leadership saw a 17% reduction in diagnostic accuracy and a 15% decrease in procedure effectiveness. And for a business, that absolutely and immediately translates to lower quality, higher costs, and of course, missed opportunities. Just for a moment, take that in and think about what that would mean to your business if that were the case. But of course, the long-term costs of this are even more devastating, because it means your recruitment pipeline dries up. And that's like, we've been talking about this for weeks. That's like, it is one of the biggest problems that all small businesses have, is filling that recruitment pipeline, no matter what industry you're in. If you have a small startup, or you're a construction company, or a medical clinic, it's all the same. So, and this is particularly accurate and acute with Gen Z, who now make up almost a quarter of today's workforce. So in 2023, Deloitte did a survey that revealed that Gen Z lifts empathy, and we've talked about this before, as I think it's the second most important characteristic that they want in a boss, yet only 35% feel that their boss demonstrates empathy. So 35% only feel that they have what they want in a work environment. And look, I mean, this generation is far different from any other. They have grown up with unprecedented information access and options. When they are looking at a company, they're researching your company culture before they even apply, or they're walking away from toxic environments. I mean, great example, one of our startup clients, they've been going through a reorg, and there's been some reports of the culture being toxic in this instance, and they've had a really tough time hiring, because this shows up on Glassdoor, this shows up on other platforms, and bam, your reputation is suddenly toast. So, of course, it's that piece. But then also, when you think about your existing team, your innovation engine stalls. It's when people fear negative consequences for speaking up or even trying new approaches, they default to safe, tested methods, even when those methods are no longer serving the business, because they're afraid to make mistakes. So over time, of course, this creates dangerous organizational blind spots. And what happens with the team that you already have when it's not going well? Your best performers leave first. And look, I mean, I don't have to tell you that in today's job market, highly performing employees, especially those with high in demand skills, they have options. They know their worth, and they're unwilling to tolerate environments where fear is the primary motivator. So you create a psychological safety deficit. And at some point, Google conducted its massive Project Aristotle study. where they identified what makes teams successful. And they found that psychological safety, as in the belief that you won't be punished for making mistakes, was the single most important factor. So, of course, fear-based leadership completely destroys this foundation. And of course, when you look at that, the financial impact of that is enormous. I saw a Gallup study that estimated that actively disengaged employees cost U.S. economy up to 550 billion, with B, 550 billion annually in lost productivity. And, at the organizational level, that means companies with low engagement score experience like 18% lower productivity, 16% lower profitability, and 37% higher absenteeism. So these are all like really big numbers. Thinking about our own clients, there's a particularly stark example I'll share. I worked with two competing financial services firms in the same market, and one was led by a CEO who was known for his demanding, often kind of harsh leadership style. Someone who created that pressure creates diamonds. And the other one was led by a woman who transformed her leadership style to focus on psychological safety and just genuine individual development. So when I followed them over 3 years, the difference in outcomes was amazing. The fear-based organization saw 43% turnover among their top performers and their innovation metrics. So when we're thinking new products, process development, all this declined over year over year. And the psychologically safe organization saw only 12% turnover in their top performers and doubled their innovation metrics in the same periods. So that's pretty intense, but the most telling was their performance during the market downturn this last year. The fear-based organization really struggled to adapt because employees were afraid to deliver bad news or suggest any radical changes. The psychologically safe organization was able to pivot quickly, with team members at all levels contributing ideas that ultimately really helped them not just to survive, but gain market share during the crisis. So that brings us to a really crucial point about Gen Z specifically. They're often labeled as difficult to work with or entitled, but this misses something fundamental about this generation. They've grown up in an era of unprecedented uncertainty, right? Like climate change, political polarization, economic instability, global pandemics, you name it. So they've watched previous generations sacrifice personal well-being for jobs that ultimately didn't really provide any security. So as a result, they're seeking something different from work. Again, there's another Deloitte digital survey that said that 60% of Gen Z employees really value autonomy and wish they had more. And yet only 1 in 10 bosses, right, recognize this priority. And this isn't entitlement. This is a legitimate desire for agency in an uncertain world. As a leader right now, it is your job to deliver certainty because there's so much uncertainty around. I think I'm going to do a whole podcast episode on that because it is so massively important. So there's a mental health startup called Talkspace, and they did research on workplace mental health, and they came up with a really critical result. Workers who regularly have to display emotions that conflict with their own feelings are more likely to experience emotional exhaustion. And that explains why Gen Z is particularly resistant to toxic workplace cultures that kind of demand, fake positivity or suppress authentic communication. So we have a perfect storm here. The leadership approaches that damage performance, meeting a generation that's increasingly unwilling to tolerate this. So the question here isn't whether fear-based leadership will fail, it's how quickly and at what cost to your organization. So especially those of you who've been in business for a long time and who've always operated a certain way and who might think that you have a little bit of this going on, you might wonder, how do we do in ways that inspire genuine commitment rather than kind of this reluctant compliance just because people feel like they have to. So I'll share a framework with you that I developed through the years of working with leaders across all different industries. I call it the Trust Impact Leadership Model, and it consists of 5 interconnected practices that create environments where people bring their best selves to work, right? They bring their A game, not because they're afraid not to, but because they genuinely want to. So number 1 is replace fear with psychological safety, everything we've been talking about. So the foundation of effective leadership isn't fear, it's trust. And that means creating an environment where people feel safe to speak up, share ideas, disagree, make mistakes, and raise concerns without fear of punishment or humiliation. Okay? So some practical steps here for you to take would be explicitly state that you value honesty over harmony in team discussions. So this is inviting conflict because that's how you get the best engagement and the best opinions and the best input from people. So they have to recognize that you value honesty over harmony. So second thing is respond to bad news, because there's always going to be bad news. So respond to bad news with curiosity rather than blame. So your question could be, hey, what could we learn from this rather than, who can I shoot here? And share your own mistakes and what you learned from them. That's always very powerful. And recognize and thank people who raise problems or challenges, and do that publicly, because it's always this the old saying, right? Punish in private and praise in public. So this is what you want to do, so people really understand what you stand for. One healthcare executive that I worked with transformed her leadership team meetings by starting each one with a round out, what mistake did I make this week and what did I learn? And she always went first, modeling vulnerability. And within the first few months, problem solving became significantly more proactive, with, of course, issues being raised earlier when they were much easier to address when stuff had been going on for forever and now we already had some significant problems. So that's number 1. Number 2 is really build that empathetic accountability structure. And you might think empathy and accountability don't go together, but they do, because accountability doesn't have to mean fear. There's research that shows that accountability based on mutual commitment and shared purpose is far more effective than accountability based on fear of consequences. So some practical steps that you can take here is co-create clear expectations with your team rather than imposing metrics on them. So make them part of the plan so that they can actually buy into the plan. Focus feedback on specific behaviors and impacts, don't make it character judgment. Provide resources and support to help people meet expectations. So, if something isn't going well, find out why and give them the support and the resources that they need to turn around and do better for you. And then, of course, celebrate progress and effort and not just outcomes, because even when things aren't necessarily going well, when you can find something that is going well and direct people's attention to that and then relate to them the relationship to, where we going from here to actually get to the end result, that is just much more helpful. So, when I think about one of our clients, a manufacturing leader I worked with transformed his approach to quality issues that way. So instead of asking, who messed this up, he started by asking, hey, what in our process made this error possible? And just this simple shift, like just asking this simple question, led to a 35% of reported quality issues coming up because people weren't afraid to report them, and ultimately a 28% reduction in actual quality problems. So that's huge when you think about that, right? So that's that. And then a big one is develop cross-generational communication skills, because look, it's a real thing. It's like people of my generation grew up very differently and were trained very differently than Gen Z. So there's a workplace psychologist that I've followed. Her name is Julia Lindsay, I think. And she has talked about that intentional communication and adaptability across so intentional communication and adaptability across generations can heal workplace disconnects. So this is particularly important for, again, engaging with Gen Z effectively. So what that means is train your managers in emotionally intelligent and cross-generational communication, and create what I love is this idea of reverse mentoring programs with younger employees where they can share insight with leadership. Make sure that you have regular feedback mechanisms that work for different communication styles and preferences, and recognize that different generations may have different needs for context and explanation, which is a huge thing that's going on in that generation gap with Gen Z. So one of my retail clients implemented a reverse mentoring program where the executive team members were paired with Gen Z employees to learn about digital trends and communication preferences. So this really benefited, of course, their digital strategy, but it dramatically increased Gen Z retention because it made them feel valued for their unique perspectives, what they were bringing to the table that even their upper executives couldn't really compete with. And then another thing is to balance autonomy with alignment. Remember that Deloitte study that I referred to earlier. 60% of Gen Zs value autonomy, but only 10% of bosses recognize this. And look, I mean, effective leaders, they create clear guardrails, but give people freedom within that. And that's what we always want to look at, because as a leader, your job is to lead 100%, but it's not written in stone. People have to understand what their decision-making capacities are, and you as a leader have to help them understand how that all fits together. So what you could take here as practical step is focus on defining outcomes clearly, but allow flexibility in how they're achieved, right? It's like you tell them what you're looking for, what's the outcome that you want, but then step back and let them figure out what's the best way to get there. Or you could even function as their coach and mentor in that process. And always provide context for decisions and connect individual work to larger purpose. So ask the question why, and then answer the because, right? And then create opportunities for those people who want to shape how work gets done. So you would think, sometimes I've worked with a ton of clients who've told me, you know what, I have nobody on the team who can be strategic. And once we helped them implement the right structures, they came back and said, I can't believe how much contribution I'm suddenly getting out of these people who I never thought had a single good thought. So create those opportunities for people to shape how work gets done. Again, give them the what, not so much of the how. And then delegate authority along with responsibility. So making me think of a tech company that I worked with where they restructured their project management approach from highly prescriptive processes where they were just telling them the how all day long to outcome-based terms. So they established clear metrics for success, but allowed teams to determine their own working methods. And this is something that we teach all of our clients in our process. And here's the really fun part: productivity increased by 41%, and employee satisfaction scores improved for something that was pretty low to, I think, it almost tripled in value. So that's a really good metric right there. And then as a leader, everybody has to develop their leadership style, but you want to lead with compassionate candor. So this is kind of the two that actually can go together, because psychological safety doesn't mean avoiding difficult conversations. In fact, it enables more honest feedback because it's delivered with genuine care for the person's growth. And that's what we want to look at. As a leader, your job is to develop more leaders. And that means you have to deliver a certain amount of unpopular news or facts, but it really matters how you do it and what your intention is behind this. So frame feedback as an investment in somebody's development, and balance challenging feedback with, of course, authentic recognition. You all know the sandwich, right? Start with the good, kind of come up with the improvements, and then finish with the good. But then also be specific about the issue and the potential that's there, and then create regular low stakes feedback opportunities rather than saving it all for formal reviews. And that's, I always preach to our clients, like those whatever annual or biannual or even quarterly reviews. If you do that, I'm not saying that they're useless, but nothing is more important than your regular one-on-ones that are based around somebody's genuine regular performance plans that get evaluated, that they get feedback on, that they can ask questions on. So everybody always knows where they're at. So thinking about, like, one of the financial leaders I worked with had traditionally avoided giving developmental feedback because she didn't want to hurt people's feelings. Like, anybody ever been in that situation? I'm going to say 85% of the people we work with are exactly this. They shy away from those potentially difficult conversations because they don't like conflict, they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, and they don't know how to do it right. So we worked on a framework where she started feedback conversations with, I'm going to share this because I see your potential to be exceptional in this role. So that is a really, really simple way. So stating her intention first, right? I'm sharing this because I see your potential to be exceptional in this role. Because what we saw, her team's performance improved dramatically. And we did an anonymous survey later, and her leaders cited that her feedback was a key factor in their development. So another of our clients always started her feedback discussions with, my positive intention for this conversation is, right? So this helps people to actually absorb the feedback and understand that it's for them and not against them. And that's what you want for feedback. So there's another case study I want to share here. A tech company that I worked with was struggling with exactly the same type of issues that we discussed today. And their leadership team, primarily Gen X, was using kind of high pressure tactics that had worked for them early in their careers because that's how they were treated. But then they were seeing alarming turnovers in their Gen Z and employees, and they were really struggling to attract new talent. So we implemented the trust impact leadership model we took about 6 months to do it. So they established psychological safety through structured practices like anxiety parties where people could safely share their concerns. They rebuilt their performance management system around empathetic accountability. They created cross-generational dialogue sessions to bridge the communication gaps between the different generations. They redesigned work processes to provide more autonomy with clear parameters, and they trained all their managers in compassionate candor techniques. Now, I'm bringing this up, and I know I'm going really long here, but this is so, I want you to understand how transformational this is, because within a year, their Gen Z retention went up by 62%. And we're talking about the good people, right? Their innovation metrics increased by 47%. Their customer satisfaction scores increased by 24%. And their revenue per employee increased by 18%. So these numbers are staggering. And look, I mean, most tellingly in their annual engagement survey, the statement, "I regularly go above and beyond what's required for my role," saw an agreement increase from 41 to 78%. So 78%, like almost double from before. Employees were stating that in their perception, in their intention, they were wanting to go above and beyond what's required of them because they are so bought into the mission and the vision, and they're so aligned with the values in this company. So as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this thought. The choice between fear-based leadership and trust-based leadership isn't just a moral one. It's a practical business decision with real consequences for performance, innovation, and sustainability. And I've given you a whole bunch of clear evidence. And, you know, as I mentioned Adam Grant earlier, he said something like the competitive advantage comes from treating people better than they expect, and earning trust makes it easier to attract, motivate, and retain talent. So think about this. This is not about lowering standards. It's quite the opposite, because leaders who create psychological safety and safe environments with clear purpose and genuine care can actually hold higher standards because people are intrinsically motivated to meet them. They actually want to be that. They're bought into the story, right? Because ask yourself, are you creating a culture where people bring their full creativity, commitment, and courage to work, or are you settling for compliance when you could be inspiring excellence, which is really what I want to inspire you to do. So because I 100% believe that the future here belongs to leaders who understand that true power comes not from making people afraid to fail, but from making them excited to succeed, right? So really get this part. Your true power comes from not making people afraid to fail, but from making them excited to succeed. And that's what I want for you. So that's all for today. I'll see you next time. We want to help you and your small business scale smarter and scale faster. And of course, stop doing it all yourself. And if you haven't seen our last episode, check it out, because we've developed some really cool new AI tech stacks that will help you do a lot of the stuff that you're doing all day that you shouldn't be doing much faster and much more easily. It'll give you all the operational and leadership structures and systems that you need to be an incredible leader, and it'll come at very low cost in time and investment and energy that you need to put in. So we want to enable you to spend your time on like doing the stuff versus having to come up with the stuff. So go to aibusinessscalingblueprint.com. So there's 3 S's there somewhere, aibusinessscalingblueprint.com. Check out what we have there for you. I'm super excited about it. We want you to implement and not get stuck in just coming up with all this stuff. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Anyway, I hope this was incredibly useful for you. If you have any questions, message us. We want to be your support system here, and I will see you next time.